All right, cool. Today's May 25th, 2023. Welcome to the Kubernetes Cluster API Azure meeting. Since we're gonna abide by the Kubernetes SIG's rules, and that means just be respectful with each other, and yeah, raise your hand before talking, and yeah, so yeah, make sure you add your names to the attendee list if you haven't already. And first thing on the agenda will be to welcome any new members or attendees. So I'm just gonna, if you're new here, please raise your hand and speak up, but I don't think anyone's new. Yeah, all familiar faces here, but yeah, if I missed you, just raise your hand. So yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and move to the open discussion. Oh, Matt.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just, since
Sorry.
Ashutosh has a long presentation, maybe we should just make sure people don't have any random things to add before we jump into that.
Oh yeah, definitely. So yeah, I'll just give everyone like a minute or two to write down any open discussion topics. Dane?
Oh, I could write it down instead if you prefer.
Sure thing.
Yeah, either way, it's a small thing. A while back, I had proposed we add bring your own network interface support to CapZ, to Azure Machine. I finally got around to opening that PR, so I threw that up, but I wasn't sure if the reviewers that were assigned were around. It looked like they may have been a little less active recently.
Gotcha. We can take a look at that for sure. I think I saw the PR. Let me just pull it up.
It's no rush. I don't think we're releasing for a while yet anyway, but
but yeah, I think it's be good for us to get some eyes on that. Wait, are you able to link the PR just somewhere here? I'll just go down one by one. Oh, here we go. Yeah, we can definitely take a look at this soon. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up and working on this.
I don't know if you all have an opinion on this right now, but I noticed the API diff check triggered on a struct name change, but there's no actual struct field change in there, so it's functionally identical.
Yeah, I think this API diff, it's just, even if it's functionally identical, it might trigger, but it's not blocking the PR. So I think we should be fine. Matt, are you going to say something?
No, just that as far as I can tell, it basically does a textual diff. It's not very smart. And so stuff like this happens where it's not, and we have to ignore it. It would be great if it were smarter.
Yeah, it's a little annoying. It's just a red X on your PR all the time, but it won't be blocking.
Right.
All right, good to know. Thank you.
No worries. So any questions about this PR, or we can just move on to Ashutosh? I guess we can also do milestone review first. So I don't know if there's any opinions on that. Ashutosh?
I was thinking we could do the walkthrough first and then do the milestone review. What do you all think?
Yeah, I agree with that. Milestone review can take an indeterminate amount of time.
Oh yeah. Okay. Sure. Let's go ahead. I think the floor is yours. We can. Do you need to share your screen? We can pass on the host to you.
Sure. Yeah, I do need to share the screen.
Yeah, let me make you a co-host. Such a bad UI. Click more. Scroll down. There we go.
Awesome. Let me- Okay, can you see the screen, like workload identity thing?
Yes,
Yeah,
we
looks
can see
good.
it.
Cool. Okay, let's get started. So this is the agenda. We'll just do a quick intro to workload identity so that we just know like what it is about. And then we'll take a high level walkthrough of the proposal that's out there, CAPC repo. And we'll also see what are the action items in order to support workload identity in CAPC. And then we'll do the walkthrough of the first implementation PR. So a little intro. Workload identity is a keyless authentication mechanism. So the story is like this. You don't require the actual Azure secrets to do authentication to Azure APIs. And this is a great advantage because it removes the risk of your credential exposure. And there are much more advantages, which I don't think we can go into that now. And if you're more interested, please take a look at the document of workload identity. And also just to mention that, feel free to stop me in while. So Matt or Willie, if anyone raises a hand, please stop me because I'm not seeing the other screen. So this is about how workload identity works. So what happens is Kubernetes itself becomes the token issuer. And the meaning of this sentence is that kubelet will issue a service account token, which can be mounted to the pod. We'll talk more about how that happens. And let's say there is a pod which wants to use workload identity. AZWI means Azure workload identity. So the pod will get a service account token. And now this service account token can be configured to be trusted on Azure Active Directory. We'll see how this happens, how we can configure the service account token so that it is trusted on AAD. And once it is trusted, the pod can use that mounted token via the SDK library to fetch an AD token, Azure Active Directory token. And now this token can be further used for further API calls on Azure. This is a little diagram that I stole from the workload identity document. So if you see the flow, at the leftmost vertical bar, we have kubelet, which projects service account token. This essentially means that the workload or the pod will have a path on their directory where the token will be available. And what happens after that? The workload of the pod uses SDK library and uses three parameters, that is your client ID, your tenant ID, and this access token, and sends a request to Azure Active Directory via the SDK library. And once it is done, the validity of the token is checked. And if it is valid, if it is all correct, if it's not malicious, a AD access token is issued to your pod. And now your pod can actually use that access token to do CRUD on Azure resources. So this is like high level, workflow of how workload identity works without actually configuring an Azure secret. Let's see how we can do it by an example. So what you essentially need to do when you want to use a workload identity is you create key pairs. For example, use tools like OpenSSL. So let's say you have sa.key and sa.pub, a public and private key. And after that, what you can do is you can create an application on Azure portal that will essentially have a tenant ID and client ID. And the next step is to create a discovery and JWCase document. These are two little JSON documents that you need to create. And while creating these two documents, you will be required to use that public key that you just generated. So you can generate the JWCase document using the public key. And then finally, you upload this document to a public accessible URL. In our case, we just upload that to Azure containers, which is accessible publicly. And the next step is once you have created that Azure app, the way we create secrets in Azure app, similarly, we can create federated credentials, which simply means that you need to fill a couple of details like the URL. And the URL is the service URL that I just talked in the above point. And you just need to put the service account name of the pod and the namespace of the pod. For example, in our case, it is capz-system, the namespace, and I forgot the name of the service account for our capz pod. So you just put that there, and your federated credentials are created. After that, your management cluster or the Kubernetes cluster, you just need to ensure that these key pairs are accessible by Kubernetes API server and Kubernetes controller manager, because they will use these keys to sign the token that is eventually projected on your pod. And also, we need to specify the service issuer URL on Kubernetes API server that we talked about in point number 4. And after you do all of this little dance, your pod is all set to use workload identity. Just that the pod needs to use the client ID, the tenant ID, and the projected token with Microsoft Azure library to exchange the Active Directory token. So this is how you can actually configure a dummy application also to use workload identity. But I'm talking more in context of capz pod here. And if you want to learn more, this is the link where you can see the Azure workload identity document. So the next thing is, why do we need it in capz? The primary reason is that AAD pod identity is deprecated. So it's deprecated, and we just want to move to something that is supported now by the community, and workload identity is the next phase of this. And in addition to that, there are very good reasons to deprecate AAD pod identity, and some of them is like the AAD identity pod used to intercept the IMTS traffic, which was not so nice. And workload identity scales well because it doesn't intercept any such traffic. And the very famous reason is you don't need Azure secrets anymore. Thus, you reduce or eliminate the risk of your secrets being exposed. So how does workload identity would eventually work in capz? So you just need to do the prerequisites that I described in the previous slide. That is, you create key pairs, that is a private key and a public key. And then you supply client ID and tenant ID to capz pod. In our current situation, we do it via Azure cluster identity, though capz pod can also get client ID and tenant ID via environment variables. And then your capz pods should have this service account token as a projected volume. So projected volume is a concept of Kubernetes where you can just project the token of service account to your pod. And then you need to write some code that uses these 3 things: tenant ID, client ID, and then the projected token with Azure SDK to exchange the AAD token. One small limitation right now we have is that cloud provider Azure does not yet support workload identity, though the PR got merged. So what this means is, if we want to use workload identity, we could just use simple plain secrets for cloud provider Azure to do authentication to Azure APIs. But then this defeats the purpose of all of this exercise that we are doing. So to mitigate this right now, we could use user-assigned identity for cloud provider Azure. That means that if you have a management cluster and you want to use workload identity, and if you are creating a workload cluster, just make sure that you use user-assigned identity so that the cloud provider on the workload cluster that gets created on Azure is able to access Azure APIs. And once you are done, and we'll talk more about this on later slides. And once you are done, have fun creating a couple of workload clusters. Okay, so now I did talk enough. So we want to see the code, how it works. But before that, I want to go through this design document. So let's go to this design document that I've already opened. And I've removed the so comments part so that it's easy for all of us to go through. You can read through this document, and if you see the goal is to enable CABZ pod to use workload identity so that we could do lifecycle management of workload clusters. And this is the persona that I'm actually talking about in this document, that somebody is a cloud admin and they want to configure, install, and maintain workload clusters on Azure using CABZ. And essentially what they want to do is they don't want to use static credentials. And one of the things that I keep talking about is CAPI pivoting. What it is, what does it mean is that a lot of users who I've interacted with and enterprise customers, they first create a client cluster. And after they create a client cluster, they create they convert that client cluster into a management cluster by installing CAPI and CABZ. And then they create a workload cluster from that client cluster. Once that workload cluster is created, they convert that workload cluster to a management cluster. And they nuke this kind cluster. So now you have a full-fledged production level Kubernetes cluster on Azure, which is acting as a management cluster. Or somebody could simply have access to a Kubernetes cluster, and they simply install CAPI and CABZ to make it as a management cluster and do lifecycle management. So these are a couple of user stories that I have written into this document. Feel free to go through this, suggest changes, or if you see any other use cases. So one of the things that I mentioned here is about management cluster and kind that we do on our CI jobs. We have a kind cluster, and management cluster and kind is often also termed as bootstrap cluster. And so what we need to do essentially is we need to generate key pairs. Here's the font size. Once we have this key pairs generated, we need to make sure that Kubernetes API server and kube controller manager have access to this key pairs. And to do that, we need to pass those key pairs path as flags. After that, you take some steps in order to configure your key pairs for workload identity. And those steps are generating and uploading discovery document and generating and uploading JWKS document. It is pretty straightforward and simple. You just need that public key and use that AZWI command to generate these two and upload to Azure storage container. Once you are done with this, you go to your Azure portal and set a federated credential, which I talked about in the previous slide. Now, CAPI and CABZ are deployed with a kind cluster that supports workload identity. And you can use client ID and tenant ID on your Azure cluster identity. You can put the client ID and the tenant ID, and you can set the type to workload identity. So this is one API change that is going to happen. So type has one more value known as workload identity. And now your management cluster is configured to use workload identity via referencing this particular Azure cluster identity. I just want to show you one more important thing here that is about the configuration change. So this is what I'm talking when I say projected service account volume. So in order to support workload identity, CABZ manager needs to be deployed with this configuration changes that you can see on screen. That simply says that we need to have this Azure identity token as a volume. And this is the volume that you specify on your CABZ configuration YAML, and this is the path where this gets mounted. So when secret silos will stop tokens, this is the path we usually call this as Azure _federated _token _path. And then you can use this token path, tenant ID, and client ID to authenticate to Azure API. And then you can walk toward the API changes that is there, this simple code that uses, if you see these three are the important thing: client ID, tenant ID, and token file path. And then use these three to use the with Azure SDK to talk to Azure APIs. That is it I wanted to talk about in the design document. And if you go, you can also see the migration plan. So we have like a migrating greenfield cluster. This sounds a little odd that what do you want to migrate a greenfield cluster? So one of the workflows that is mentioned in the design document is that you don't start a management cluster on day 0 with workload identity. Usually what happens is that you create a management cluster using plain Azure secrets and then migrate to using workload identity. And the reason to do so is that you need to actually patch your Kubernetes API server to include service issuer URL and the key pairs path on Kubernetes API server flags. So you can go through this. What is the step to kind of get started on creating a management cluster with workload identity? And also, I can't find the migration here, or brown felt this. Okay, it's here. It was on black. So this is at line 457. This is the step for if somebody is already using a management cluster that does not use workload identity, but use, let's say, AD pod identity, how could they migrate using workload identity? Go to this, let me know if you have any questions and we can talk more about this. So now let's move to the other section of the presentation. Okay, so this is just the code. Let me walk you through the code then. So first of all, let's take a look at the API changes that we are doing. So we are introducing workload identity as a new type in Azure Cluster Identity. And also now the type field on Azure Cluster Identity is immutable. The reason is we don't want somebody to edit the type field to say that I just want to use workload identity, and then the system will be in a bad state, because to actually start using workload identity, there are a couple of steps, in fact, manual steps that need to be taken care of now. And if you see in this file, Azure scope identity.go, what I've done is like if Azure cluster identity has workload identity, then I'm just using the Azure SDK code to create a instance of workload identity credentials by passing on tenant ID and client ID. And then once I do this, I again call a function known as new workload identity credentials, which actually gives me an object which will be able to configure workload identity for this. So the main logic and the code resides here in Azure scope workload identity.go file. If you scroll through this is a little structure. Assertion, file cred, loss cred. I don't know too much about all of this, what it does, because I've just taken it from the sample implementation from the Azure workload identity repo. But essentially what it does is, if you see this workload identity credential options, it has client ID, tenant ID, and token file path. And is it core.client option is one of the structures in the library. So let's not talk about much on this one. And new workload identity credential options just returns an instance of the structure at line number 71. And line number 84, this function just sets client ID. This function just sets tenant ID. And at line number 96, get projected token path. It just fetches you the token path. As of now, if you see Azure federated token file path, this is what it is that we have seen in the config of the CAPZ deployment channel, which is mount. This is the mount path. So we just return that. And if this is empty, this is it will not be. Oh, okay, sorry. No. So at line number 97, we fetch from environment variable. We could also specify that path from environment variable. And if that is empty, then you use this defined path here at line number 60. So essentially, this whole code from the selected area that you see just makes sure that you have tenant ID, client ID, and token path configured. And then this is with defaults that just set some defaults. If client ID is empty, just read from env and stuff like that. And then new workload identity credentials. It actually calls the Azure identity SDK and passes tenant ID, client ID, and all of this objects in order to get you a CRED object. And then finally, get token is an implementation. So this CRED object has an implementation of get token method, and you just set context to be using to workload identity. This line just introduces a workload identity type in CRDs. This is somebody raised hand. Go ahead.
Sorry, that was me, Ashutosh. I had some question with respect to the implementation of that. Would you like me
Sure.
to ask now or in the end?
Yeah, no, go ahead. Tell me the line number.
So I think line number 71 itself, if we could go over the place where we are over here, yeah, 75 is where we are getting the token file path, right?
Yep.
Is there a way we could encrypt the token file path, the one which we specify in the CAPZ YAML itself, right? In the manifest itself, that is where it's coming in from, right? The mount path.
Yep.
So do you think this might be completely unrelated, but then I was wondering if there's a way we could encrypt it, and if we encrypt it, would there be a value we'd be adding over there?
So as of now, I don't know why this should encrypt it. This is the first thing, but I had not thought about it a while. So I don't have an answer to that, but I think that should be technically possible to encrypt it. But the thing is that the Azure SDK library will expect you to pass a unencrypted token file path. Was this your question?
No, I think I'll also go back and then try to understand this again. But it was only from the perspective of if someone were to look at the manifest, would encrypting the token file path would add a level of security. It's not like they cannot access it, but if it is encrypted, we could always decrypt it at getting the token file path function and then supply it to Azure. But just a thought, not a blocker kind of thing.
Problem. That's a good point. So I did think about this. So yeah, let's chat about this. If this is something that can bring value and help us secure this, we should do that going forward. Thank you, Nawaz. But yeah, I don't have anything top of my head right now on the encryption part. Okay. Anybody else just want to talk about it or ask any questions, because I've been talking from a long time. So feel free to do that. Dad, I see your hand raised.
I don't believe the file path itself contains anything sensitive.
The file path contains the token. I mean, this is the path. And if you just, let's say, cat that path, it will have the token. That is the service account token.
Correct. The contents of the file at that are sensitive, but the contents are not in the YAML.
No. Contents are not in the YAML. So if you see the YAML, if I can find it today, it is just, just the file path. I mean, so it happens dynamically during runtime. Kubelet is going to inject the token into your path, and this is going to be the path. Just to answer your question, Dan?
It wasn't really a question. It was more a comment that I don't believe there would be value in encrypting the path string, because what is present in the YAML is not sensitive.
Got it.
Yeah, makes sense to me too. Yeah. Thanks, team.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, so this file workload_identity.go, this had some boilerplate code that I've taken it from the MSL library. And it just essentially sets up tenant ID, client ID. It sets up the context to make structure object and pass it to Azure SDK in order to extend Active Directory token. So if you want to use workload identity, you are going to actually use this constructor or method at line number 132 that says that, hey, I want to use a workload identity. And you can use this workload identity credential options to pass your tenant ID, client ID, and the federated token file path. And then it is going to give you a token credential. So this function line at line number 132 does that using this helper functions here. Okay, so let's go back to manager YAML. This is CAPZ manager YAML. This is a to-do. We want to be deprecating AD pod identity. And so in order to do that, we have to clean up a couple of items in CAPZ code base. So this is just a to-do for that. And one more little minute detail is that if you have your Kubernetes cluster set up and configured so that the pods can use workload identity, then what you need to do is you need to say that you need to put this label. So I'm putting this label in CAPZ manager pod that says that this pod can use workload identity now. And this is the volume mount, and this is the volume. This is, I don't know why this changes there. I'll look into that later, but yeah, this is just the servicing of YAML. Maybe some indentation changes. Okay, so that was the code part. Now let's go through the makefile script. Okay, I just want to talk about this. So I have set skip create management cluster to true. The reason is, so far in our CI, we are creating management cluster through E2E workflow or the E2E framework. And one of the reasons we don't want now the E2E framework to create the kind cluster for us is that it does not support setting certain flags on the kind configuration YAML. And when I talk about certain flags, these are those flags that says, this is the service account key, this is the service account public key, and you just put them as an extra mounts on your kind cluster. So we just say that we are going to create our own kind cluster that supports using workload identity, and that's why we are skipping creation of management cluster via the E2E framework. And this is a make target that's been added by me, and it just says that you create a kind cluster whose name is CAPZ E2E, and then use this script to create a kind bootstrap cluster or management cluster, whatever you may term it. And it says this environment variable is a WI to true. And if you see at line 6655, this is the initial hook for running our E2E test. It just calls this target, which creates a fine bootstrap cluster. And if I scroll to show you that script, so this is the script, finds with registry, that was being called in the makefile. And what it does is it checks for certain prerequisites. And one of the prerequisites is that your kind cluster or the bootstrap cluster should have service account, the public key and the private key that we were talking some time back. And those are exposed as secrets and into environment variable. So if you read this environment variable, you get that public key and the private key. So we're just checking if that is available or not. How this is made available in our CI, we'll talk later. But just assume that the kind cluster has access to these contents into environment variable, and then they read those contents and make this file. So we have the public key and the private key now, and service account is our URL. So this is the URL that our CI is using. So you could publicly access this URL. This is where the discovery document and the JWPS document is published. And those documents are generated using this public key. And that's how they are able to authenticate the identity of the token. And at line number 65, there is a function that says create kind cluster for workload identity. And if you see at line number 72 to 76, this is what I was talking about, extra mounts. So our kind cluster needs to have access to the public key and the private key. and also the controller manager. And this is what something is not supported right now via our E2E framework. And that's why we need to create our own client cluster. Somebody raised hand.
Just a quick question. I can't remember. Is the service account issuer and key files, are those repeatable arguments or are those just the one?
I didn't get your question. Come again, Mike?
The server in the API server extra args there, where you have to set now these settings for workload identity.
You're at line number 82.
Yeah, are those 3 fields repeatable arguments, or do you only have the option to set them once?
You set them once, but then once you want to change that, that is what is known as like the rotation. You can,
Right, I just wasn't sure if the API server allowed you to repeat them so that you could set multiple values for them.
I don't know if you can set multiple values for them, Dan.
I don't recall either, but I think some of those you can, but the problem is the YAML won't let you.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking about. Okay, thanks.
Got cool. So yeah, this is the client cluster story that we need to like tweak a bit in terms of workload identity. And you know, you see there is this little variable that says if workload identity is enabled, you just check the prerequisites and then use this function to create a client cluster. And if not, just use the way it has been used so far. This is a simple template here that uses workload identity, and you can, this is just a template. I don't think you need to talk much about this. Just notice that it is using user assigned identity because of cloud provider as of not supporting workload identity yet. And this is Azure cluster identity, which has tenant ID, client ID. This is a couple of templating things. And this is the E2E test. What it does is it creates so when the E2E soup runs, the client cluster is created, client cluster has access to the key pairs, client cluster has the service URL present, the API server of the client cluster. And now we deploy, we have everything up and running, CapZ pod, CapE pod, and it is just going to use this template, which I was scrolling up above. And if you see, this template has type workload identity. So, you know, for this tenant ID and this client ID and the key pairs that we generated, the workload identity configuration has already been done. And then the E2E test runs and creates a workload cluster. So this is the E2E test, adding the location of the file for the E2E test. And if you see in the E2E test suite.go, this line at 166, we need this change because now we are creating our own kind cluster and we are not following the E2E framework path. So we need to load images manually. So this is a workaround for now to load the images that is there. Once the E2E framework supports putting all those flags on kind cluster configuration, we will not need that. David.
Yeah, have you done any tests with AKS, or is it all self-managed?
I have not done anything with AKS. I think it's a pretty much work without any prerequisites, right?
Okay. And have you by chance at all like looked at the operator at all either?
The webhook operator is a WI.
Yeah, for the
Yes.
CAPI operator. Yeah.
Yes, and the initial design document proposed using that, but then we are not using that going forward. We are. Is this a question that why are we not using the webhook operator?
No. I just was curious because we want the
I will talk
workload
more about
identity to
that.
work with the operator, but that's not a essential thing. But the AKS thing is for sure. Like people need to be able to know how to use workload identity for self-managed or the managed cluster, right?
Sure.
And I'm sure there's probably some nuances between the two.
Oh yeah, I mean, as far as I know, like using workload identity on AKS is pretty straightforward. So I just happen not to use it, but yeah, sure, I can try that. Or if anybody here is actively working on managed clusters or AKS, they can just give it a try and we can pair on that. But I have not used it now, and I don't see any problem on using workload identity via AKS. I mean, we don't need to do all of this extra dance for that.
Okay.
Yeah, but point noted. I will take its clusters. So that's it, folks, for the code walkthrough. I mean, it's still a PR, so feel free to go there and review, put your suggestions, comments. This is an exercise that we are doing just to help every one of us to get review and set context. So what's next? So next is a little bit more. So these are subsequent works that we can see. And here, let's talk about the UX for workload identity in cloud provider Azure. So right now, cloud provider Azure does not support using workload identity. The PR is already merged, and we just want to track this work here once the workload identity feature is supported there. So we need to do a couple of changes in CAPZ. And then this is one issue that tracks how to convert CI jobs, all the CI jobs into workload identity. And going forward, so CI has access to this key pairs and secrets, and these key pairs are configured to use workload identity. Thank you, Cecil, for helping on this. So we needed to raise a PR in test and prod that set the preset for the jobs. So Tilt, how does it help us? Like, what is the developer experience? So you can just do regular make tilt up as of now if you don't want to get into the complexity of setting all those federated credentials, generating key pairs. And you can still pretty much do your development. You can use static Azure credentials. But let's say if you want to use workload identity, you just need to pass this Azure WI equals to true. But if you do this, you need to follow the prerequisites in the doc. And there is no doc yet, so I'm going to raise a commit in the PR that says how to do that. But the prerequisites is just setting environment variables and two important environment variables, one for key, public key, and the private key that you have generated. And once you have generated, then configuring it to be using workload identity. So this is the tilt so. Thanks to Anis and Cecile who were like giving me feedback and suggestions on getting this through. So with this, we have came to the end of the walkthrough. I'm open to questions. Matt.
Have you thought about, or do we have plans to make this the default in general for user templates as well, or is that too disruptive?
We can make this default for RCI for sure, but I need to think more on if we should make it default in general for user templates. I have not thought about that yet.
Yeah, obviously that's in the future. I mean, this seems like the way we would want everyone to go in general, but obviously it's more set up. So
yeah. Yeah, one of the things is, if you look at the user story that I've mentioned, just starting with workload identity in day 0 is a bit challenging. So because you have to like put all those key pair service URLs and stuff like that. So just go to that. Mostly when people use CAPI pivoting, they create a kind cluster, then they create a management cluster out of it, right? So that becomes very tricky, and then you just first use the static credentials, create your management cluster, and then migrate to workload identity and new your kind cluster. So we can talk more about that before the PR. Dan.
Yeah, I think before we would want to make that default for people, it would be ideal if the tooling to set all that up were a little more in place, maybe in cluster CTL or maybe an auxiliary tool if necessary. Just to create the tool, generate keys, export them to the right places, all that stuff.
Yeah, I think going forward, once we have the capability inside Camp Z, we'll get more ideas, more feedback on how to get through this, and we'll have more insights on how we can make this the thing going forward. Yeah. Any more questions? Okay, then. So I have a request to all of you. Feel free to go to the proposal PR and the PR and ask as many questions you want. Hit me up on Slack. Ask a lot of questions because this was also new for me, and it required like a lot of to and fro discussion. So it is quite possible that we might discover an enhancement right now. But it's looking good, and Anis and Cecil have already been reviewing it. So feel free to review it and help me out there and ask a lot of questions. Thank you.
Yeah,
Over
thank you
to
so much.
you.
Oh, sorry. Thanks so much for the demo, Ashutosh. That was really informative. And I'll definitely look back at the recording just to like absorb everything. But thank you for working on this and offering to do the demo. That was awesome. And yeah, let me just go back to the agenda. We have 9 minutes left, so we'll just do a quick milestone review. Let's see. I'll just bring up the milestone, and then we can, if anyone has any updates, we can just bring it up. Also, I'm not sure how to get to milestones from like the main page. Does anyone know that? Because I just click on the PR and then click on the milestone from there.
You go ahead. You got it there. It's also an issue.
Wait, let's see.
Milestone.
Oh, it's on the top. Okay, whoops.
It's right there. Yeah.
Let me go back. Here we go. Oh, let me look at issues first.
Yeah, I think it would be good to actually do a pull request review and categorize the ones that need to be done. So if you can go to the projects page,
Projects.
under projects, yeah, and then go to that, and then go to the PR triage, yeah, and then ideally the ones that are in the state of no status would be good to go through.
Okay. Sure. I can just, I don't think I have time to go through every single one. So if y'all see something, oh, go ahead.
Just get done with whatever one you can.
Okay. So let's just start from the top. Fix diff for authorized IP ranges. Nawaz?
Yeah, Willie, I have a fix for that, but I couldn't really replicate the issue which the user was suggesting. So, and I was also blocked with the AKS flavor on sorry, which one is that? Yeah, applying AKS flavor. So I did fix that up, but again, didn't get a chance to look back at it. So
okay. So I guess we should keep it at the milestone since we're still waiting on the user.
So this, yeah, so for this, we're going to just be setting status for the PRs. We're not going to be doing it for milestone.
Oh, okay.
So then if I'm hearing what you're saying now is it's waiting on the author to do something.
I don't think the author or the person would get back to us because I'm taking over his PR and we haven't heard back from the author. I'd still put it in progress probably.
Okay. All right.
Thanks.
Okay. Sure. So next use 12/12 for pod CIDR.
I know about this one. We should assign it to Jack and put the status as waiting on author.
Assigned.
It was blocked because this change would have broken the AZ Cappy extension, but I made a change in AZ Cappy, so this won't matter. And I think Jack just hasn't had time to get back to it.
Okay,
But it
so
should be unblocked now, and I think it's a good idea.
okay, I'll assign it to Jack and wait on author. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We just went over this proposal for workload identity. That's in review. Needs review. Correct. There we go. Added CRUD test for a load balancer profile. Not sure who the
I think
author
this is just a waiting review.
Looks like it's
Oh no.
author.
Yes, I would say so. He hasn't fixed the broken test.
Okay, decouple the load balancer front port with backend port. It doesn't show who the author is. It's kind of have to click on it.
Be good if you could copy the creator of it as well. Put it in the creator.
Okay. Looks like there's a discussion here. Wait on author.
And then it looks like since Cecile's done the review, to assign it to her.
Install cloud provider Azure chart in E2E test using Cap8. Jonathan is working on this. This is looks like it's in progress. I'm not sure if this is in progress or needs review, but it needs a rebase. So and there's been some pushes, so
Wait on author, I think, and
Yeah.
put him in there as the creator. So
add work in progress. These are all work in progress, so I'll just throw on the in progress tag. If that's cool. In progress, in progress. Also in progress. Add Azure CNI v1 E2E test. That is from Nawaz. I think this was being reviewed, or does this need a review, Nawaz?
This one's really blocked on the Azure
Oh, it's
content
blocked.
networking, yeah,
Okay.
issue. So
Okay, let's just put the blocked on there. Looks like this is a draft PR. Is this in progress, Nawaz? Yeah.
yeah, that should be in progress. Yes.
All right, cool. Just making sure it's not blocked or anything. I guess I'll just leave it dependabot PR. I mean, it's probably just being reviewed right now.
It's blocked because it wants to bump some other stuff that we don't want to move, right? Yeah.
Okay.
I don't really know what to do with these. We could close them, I guess, but it's gonna be
I
blocked
mean,
for a while.
would we need this in the future or no?
At some point in the future, yeah.
Okay,
But
maybe.
it's kind of lame to let it sit around in the PR queue for like months until we decide to merge it.
Okay, well, I'm not sure
That's what
how
we've been doing.
dependabot usually works, but can we like reopen this when it becomes applicable again, or should we just?
If you close it, that sends a command to dependabot that you don't care about that particular, and it'll reply back and it'll say, okay, I won't let you know about version 3.12.0 again. And maybe that's what we want, but that means dependabot wouldn't create a PR until there's like a 3.12.1 release of help. So anyway, it's blocked. Sorry to make
Yeah,
it
let me just throw it on the blocked
I
list.
took up
for
all the
now.
rest of our time there.
No worries. We got like half a minute. Anything super okay, install Calico Helm chart. This is hold. Looks like also wait on author. And then install Azure's this CSI driver Helm chart also. Looks like this is, I'm not sure if this is in progress, but yeah, I'll just put it on wait on author again. And I think that's all our time. So
Wait,
got through most of the list. Oh,
the,
sorry.
the very next one is literally just waiting on whether we want to remove a space or not. So Nawaz, if you want to take a look at that, it's ready to
Oh,
move.
that's right. It was just a very nitpicky, like to make sure it's the right space.
Okay.
But after that, it's ready to merge. Just wanted to point it out. Sorry.
No worries. Okay, so that's all the time that we have. Thank y'all for coming, and that was a great demo again, Ashutosh. And yeah, thanks for showing up the great discussion, guys. So see y'all next week.
Thanks for
Thanks,
hosting,
everyone.
Willie. See you.
Yeah, no
Thanks,
problem.
Willie.
everybody.
Have a good day, everyone.